focused on how the continent can optimize its creative industries, knowledge economy, and harness its soft power effectively to propel itself forward while championing the inclusion of African voices and the voices of the global Black community in global discourse. Our session today is the business of film, building a sustainable African film industry. And Dayo, you have to forgive me, I was just talking about this, for always stealing your quote, where you say films can serve as a conveyor belt for hope, and we can change perspectives faster than we can build roads. And we all know how important this is for Black people everywhere. We're very thrilled to have today with us Selwyn Seyfu Hinds, Dayo Ogunyemi, Deniese Davis, and Stephen Love on this session. And steering the conversation is the amazing Mehret Mandefro, award-winning producer, writer, director, founder at A51 Films and Truth 8 Media. Before we start, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our audience for being here today. And of course, a huge thanks again to our media and strategic partners for supporting this event. Mehret, over to you.
Great. Well, talking about global Black culture is my favorite thing. So it's very nice to be here with you. Thank you, Kuro, for organizing this and curating an amazing month of programming. Before we kick it off, I would love to give the mic to my panelists to introduce themselves. So Stephen, we're going to start with you. Keep it brief, but we'll just do a round robin of introductions.
Thank you for having me. My name is Stephen Love, originally from South Carolina in the US, currently in Los Angeles, and producer, film, TV, branded content, pretty much anything that has a story to it, I'm willing to produce it.
Great. Deniese?
Hi, everyone. My name is Deniese Davis. I'm originally from Las Vegas, Nevada, here in the U.S., but now, currently reside in Los Angeles. I'm also a producer. Stephen is a kinfolk in the industry with me, but I came up with Issa Rae, producer on Insecure and Black Lady Sketch Show, and most recently launched my own production company, Reform Media Group, which I'm really excited about.
Thanks. Selwyn?
Hey everybody, my name is Selwyn Seyfu Hinds. I am from Guyana, so I'm a Caribbean boy. I am globally Black. Grew up in Brooklyn, live in Los Angeles right now. I'm a storyteller. I think that's the easiest way to say it. I'm a little older than I look, but the grades probably give me away. So I have had a long journey through media from back in the 90s when I ran the Source magazine and was a hip hop journalist to lots of other things. But the last 10 years, I've been doing a film TV thing in Hollywood and some cool stuff that we'll get into later. Hey guys, nice to meet you.
And last but not least, Dayo.
Hi, my name is Dayo Ogunyemi. I'm a recovering lawyer. Former music journalist like Selwyn. We actually worked at the Source. I'm now a TV and film producer, creative entrepreneur. I've been working on the continent over the last 20 years to help put together a business framework behind industries from Nigeria's Nollywood to Kenya to South Africa.
Thank you. So we're going to kick it off with a question around COVID and the shifts that COVID has brought to the industry. I'm of the belief that it's actually created huge opportunities, but I would love to hear from you guys what it could mean for new business models and what kinds of changes it's brought to the film industry.
Well, I guess I'll start if you guys don't mind. I'll start on the creative side versus the business side. So I've been running and writing a show for Hulu for the last year, and the biggest impact for those of us who work in television, obviously, is that we've been doing our writers' rooms via Zoom, right? So my writers' room looks a lot like this, and what that has done, and I think what that portends for the future, is open up some of these things that have been closed, for a while. For a long time, the maxim has been, if you want to write in television, you have to live physically here in Los Angeles. And in my current room, I don't have anyone international, but people are in different parts of the country, which is fairly radical. So for the next 2 or 3 shows that I'm actually getting up right now, I have been talking to writers, for instance, in Trinidad, in Jamaica, in London. So I think the idea that you can be based physically in other places beyond LA is potentially is a really big game changer. So I think that's just a good place for me to start.
I agree.
I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, go ahead, Dayo, please.
Yeah, I mean, so to Selwyn's point, about 4 years ago, there's a project, a TV project in development we had that was set between Texas, or is set between Texas and the Niger Delta. And, you know, one of the things we had required is a, you know, Hollywood TV writer, as well as, you know, an African, Nigerian American author. And, you know, one of the things when we were talking with the production partners was we wanted some Nigerians, you know, in the writer's room. And at the time, and this is just 4 years ago, at the time it was just sort of this, well, how's that going to happen? You know, are they going to move to LA? You know, and for something that was set partly in Nigeria, we knew that we needed people who were not just Nigerian in origin, but who understood what the actual environment we were trying to portray and what we were going to end up having to shooting was like. And, you know, to Selwyn's point, that, you know, the last year and a half has completely exploded that idea that, you know, the writers' rooms and other types of collaboration have to be physical. There's definitely an advantage to being physically in the same space, but I think as diversity and inclusion continue to gather momentum in the industry, this is a huge and important way of opening up not just representation, but also collaboration as well. I think 3 years ago, must be about 3 years ago, a mutual friend reconnected me with Selwyn. And I don't know if you remember this, Selwyn, it's more like 5 years ago, but it's a project, you know, we were discussing a project that was going to be set, you know, in West Africa. And yeah, you know, so there's, you know, at the time he was in LA, which is the right place for it, but not entirely clear how all that would have worked. And I think today it's a lot easier.
And do you guys think this shift will be permanent? Like, do you think it means that is the way we're going to? Deniese, you have a very skeptical face, so I'm gonna.
I mean, if we had it our way, it won't be. I do think certain things will be that have been implemented will stick around, and that's just from like a good hygiene, good processes, right? That we've had to adjust to. However, I will say, you know, talk about COVID and the impact. It's expensive, to be honest. It is very expensive, and every day. A lot of things are hanging on the, you know, on the resolve of can we have a safe set, right? And I think it has impacted production in ways that is just not cost efficient in many ways. I know that, I mean, the general rule of thumb right now is that COVID costs are about a third of your budget, right? So you had $1 million movie, you got to go find another couple $100,000 on top of that just to cover your COVID costs. And so it is a very expensive like protocols that's been set up. And so I think from a prohibitive standpoint, but also again, just I've been in production since January. I'm still in it. So maybe I'm coming from a very much more like I'm over this point of view. But to be honest, it is, I mean, we're shooting half the pages we once shot, right? The restrictions that are that you're handed. I mean, for a producer, to be honest, it's been fun but challenging because you're now having to lean into creative solutions in a way that you didn't have to before, right? And I'm talking about really logistically saying, we want to execute this scene, it's a party. You would think it's just like, we're going to go in and shoot it, but you have to think about the location. You have to think about how many bodies can be in that location. I mean, we've been restricted to 50 extras, indoor, outdoor, no matter what, right? So you have a big college party, like, what are you going to do with that? So it has kind of made you lean into, I think, the creative process that without having to impact the story itself and saying, how do we stay true while still making concessions and compromises? And and for those reasons, again, I'm like, let's COVID slowly has to find its way out the door, because we can't work like this for years. I mean, we've all made adjustments, but I personally think it's probably going to be around for another year or two, just in terms of the adjustments until everything's fully vaccinated. But the last thing I'll say in terms of the impact on the business is that I think what's been most eye-opening for me is availability right now. I mean, you talked about opportunities, and I think one of the reasons why there is a lot of ample opportunities is because as things got back to work, the shutdown in Hollywood was greatly impacted, right? From below the line crew to above the line crew, creators, you name it. No one worked for, minimum at least 6 months. It took a while to get things up. So what happened? Well, production delays, writing schedules, everything shifted and adjusted. And there's been an overemphasis on development because that was kind of the only thing that we could do for a while. But then now that things are back up, you can only shoot so many things at once and have so many available, A-list directors, so many available A-list talent. And so you're seeing I think the bottleneck squeeze of everything happening at once and trying to get new content to the screen. But I went out to an actress for something who loved the script, but was like, I'm unavailable for 18 months because I now have lined up all the projects I was supposed to shoot last year. Yeah. And you're like, oh, well, who else do we get? Everyone is busy. So that is, I think, some of the challenges right now on the business side is really, how do you coordinate putting the right team together on a project? And what's happening is it's allowing room for, I think, emerging people to come up, because everyone that you once would go to is just insanely booked for quite a long time, to be honest.
So
I totally agree.
That point. Oh, go ahead, Stephen. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I totally agree. I just finished a film. I was in Atlanta shooting I was in prep in October and I finished in March, right? Or into March. So it was like 6 months in the height of COVID. And COVID doesn't care if you're a $100 million film or $1 million film or $100,000 film. The COVID test costs the same amount of money. The COVID kind of protection where it costs the same amount of money. Because it's super expensive. So I hope that goes away. But I do hope what Selwyn and Dayo spoke of, the sort of democratization of content remains, because it definitely allows you to bring in a lot more voices that may not have access to come move to LA, et cetera, and talent too. I've even on the branded content side of the business, business actually didn't stop during COVID. We were continuously shooting, but we weren't physically there. So we started doing like these remote shoots, which is a whole different thing that I think, I think some of that may remain too, because again, it democratizes the ability for a director from the continent to then shoot something that's happening in New York, and then maybe the cinematographers in Canada, but we're all on Zoom, like physically, so not physically there, but just all managing the production from Zoom, while somebody's there to manage it, obviously on set. But I think there's a lot of possibilities there for sure.
So
if I might merge before you jump back in, just one small point. I'm keeping in mind what Obi and those guys said about, those little tangible bits for our, global diasporic audience to hang on to. And I just want to hang a lantern on one thing, the idea that, for us, for writers especially, Zoom isn't going anywhere, right? And there's an aspect of this business, because this business is, as we know, it's like high school, right? So it's a social business, and there's this one component that has always been, will never change, something called general meetings, right? To do anything, to get anything started, you need a general meeting. So imagine the difference in the old world, where a general meeting meant you had to be in the city. Let's skip how one gets the meeting, but the physicality of it, you had to be in the city, you had to get to HBO or do whatever. Now, a writer, who gets, in the door, whatever, who wants to meet with me on the show, I don't care where you are. Like, I'm never doing in-person generals again. I'm like, jump on Zoom. You're in London, you're in Lagos, you're in Accra, you're in Cape Town. This is how we do it, and that is a huge leveling of the playing field. There's still a lot to do so that you can have a general meeting with a Deniese or a Stephen, but the fact that you don't have to figure out how to get to LA is, I think, is going to be with us, hopefully forever. So,
you guys are all speaking to a point where if we're assuming COVID created cracks in our system, I believe that it also exposed limitations of the system, right? Especially the talent pipeline. As someone who's constantly thinking about training young folk all over the world. I would love to talk to you because I think a lot of the audience kind of wants to meet people like you. So in that vein, what can we do or what can be done about ensuring that some of these opportunities actually, people capitalize on them, translates into actually people getting in? So if we could shift a little, and this is with the larger kind of goal of really trying to increase collaboration and partnerships between African filmmakers as well, with Hollywood and the diaspora. Like, how do we do that? Now that these openings have happened, like, how do we take it one step further?
To be frank, I think it's on those of us that are sort of in the system already. It's on us to open the door. Honestly, that's to build that bridge. Because to your point, the talent is there, the stories are there all across the world in diaspora. It's a responsibility. I mean, I take it seriously that it's time for us to kind of build this bridge, especially now when there's a window, to Selwyn's point, where the industry is now probably never going to want to do a ton of general meetings in person, or want to do writers' rooms all in person, because it's just less efficient than what we found on Zoom, right? And so with exploiting the technologies that are there, for us to now say, okay, hey, we're going to utilize that. We know you can do it, Hollywood, because you've done it for the last however many months or years now. It's time for us to go build a bridge in a real way.
And I would say I'm fascinated to see how the old world and the new world kind of come together, right? Because there are things about the old world that are important. So just as a small anecdotal example, I don't know, in 2006, 2007, I was with Reggie Hudlin at BT in the original content department, and we were trying to do this Fela movie, right? And as part of that, myself and another couple of producers went to Nigeria to meet with Femi and Yemi and talk to the family, and we were hosted by Obi, who played a big role in that. It's the first time I met him, right? That film ended up not working out, but I had the time of my life in Lagos, right? It was my first time, not to the continent, but my first time to to Nigeria, and that social construct, that coming together, meeting people, is always sat in my head and my heart. So I can't tell you what it is right now, but next year I'm writing a film for literally the biggest movie star in the world. And the first thing I said in the pitch room was like, this whole first act that we want to do elsewhere, we're doing it in Lagos. And they were like, oh yeah, cool, let's do that. So it's not announced yet. It'll be announced much later, but there's going to be a huge film that'll be shot partly in Lagos next year, because Obi showed me a good time. Right? So I get the point there is, again, going back to the fact that it's high school, like, people want to meet people, they want to get together. Like, what are the forums and the things that that we can create that are not ostensibly about business, but ultimately do serve that that function. Like, Dayo and I have a decades-long relationship that is like, I don't have to see him every year, but he pops up and we can talk and something can happen. So it's just, and we do that writ small here in LA and Hollywood all the time. So it's like thinking broadly now, like, some of it maybe in the Zoom sense, but I think there's going to be those of us who are going to be these cultural connectors, who have to think proactively, how am I bringing together people in the diaspora, the filmmakers in the Caribbean, in the US and Canada, and then in Africa. I mean, I'm not sure if it's a yearly event. I'm not sure if it's sort of that programmatic and formulaic, so to speak, but I think the idea of creating a forum so people meet, understand their their vibes, their similarities, and the way that seeps into your work as an artist, it's the old and new combinations that I'm trying to think about what that means going forward.
Absolutely. And to pick up on, I'm really glad to hear what Stephen has had to say, because I do think that there are very substantial differences between how the US works or Hollywood works, especially on the TV side, and how the continent works. On the film side, we have had some of this cross-pollination happening. Mehret, you would know this from obviously experience through, the usual faces that we see on the film side at Cannes, at Toronto, at Venice. We have that cross-pollination happening. It just happens that, the development process and development cycle for film is even longer than it is for TV, typically. So it could be 6-7 years before somebody brings a project to market on the indie film side. And what Stephen has said is so key, because there is, the truth of the matter is that, TV has taken over the world. TV used to be, a bit of a stepchild relative to film, a very secondary consideration for talent and for people on the business side, and that's just not the case anymore. Yes, there will be a handful of, blockbuster movies that will continue to have the global impact that they have. But from a bread and butter standpoint, and since we are talking about how this affects the African continent and the global Black diaspora, a lot of the opportunities are going to be in television. It's like trying to get people to see what the opportunities are in terms of audiences, in terms of stories, particularly coming from a US standpoint, where the US continues to be, call it the locomotive of the creative industry. And people just seeing what the possibilities are in Kenya, in South Africa, in Burkina Faso, in Egypt, wherever else, to connect the dots and really end up building what will be 20, 30 years from now, the largest untouched audience in the world. And the Chinese get this. They build towards that point. But I think that sometimes when I think of my peers and friends in the industry in the UK, in Europe, and in the US, is a very Western-centered view of the world, which is where the money is right now. But look at the demographics. 40, 50 years from now, it's going to be a completely different story. And Africa is the only continent that is continuing to grow. It's the youngest continent, average age 18, 19. And what are the consequences 30, 40 years down the line, even in a world that's been shrunken by technology? What will that mean for the stories that are being made and how they're being consumed? And I think we need to set that foundation, now.
And more importantly, what does it mean for the industry? In terms of how does the industries begin to compete globally? Obviously, Netflix, for example, has entered the African market. So I would love to hear what you guys think about, Netflix is creating original content and what that can mean for opportunity, as well as challenges, quite frankly, for the local indie makers. Does anyone have thoughts on that? Denise?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think, look, there's obviously a lot of opportunities that are coming by way of Netflix's global reach, and that's mostly because by and large, they have the biggest global eyeballs, right? That's just bar none. But what I keep thinking is really interesting is looking at the amount of content that they are putting out, both from a domestic and a global standpoint. And I, for one, on the domestic side, have been very bullish about this export of, the U.S. continent content being put out across the globe to build their business globally, as much as they're also doubling down and investing in local languages, right? But from what Dayo was touching on, which is this idea of this locomotive like control over who owns and who has the say about what content gets put out. I've been having this fight where I've been very honest and saying, look, like it's almost, this industry is cyclical. And I think about the film industry, 100 years ago, and when the rise of television came along, or the rise of film, and what tends to happen is, they bet on white, right? White is the thing that they kind of that carries themselves to grow the demand. And I think we all know that there's a huge underserved audience that actually has more market power. And I think what concerns me is this idea that we have a chance to change the narrative in the historical sense of like what can actually be sold across the seas, what can actually grow an audience, and it's not being looked at in a real way. And so I always come from a standpoint where I'm like, yes, Netflix is great. Let's use their tailwinds to build some sort of foundation. But what really needs to happen is that we unhook ourselves from these main 5 distributors, because that's it, who controls the media, and actually say, where are we in building our own infrastructure to compete, to own and control these stories? Because at the end of the day, we won't be considered, I think, true power. And the last thing I'll say, this is also coming from an argument I had with the Netflix executive, mostly around this idea of a Black comedy series with two Black women that, in their opinion, wasn't an international show. And I fought them hard on this because I was like, who are you to say such a thing, right? And I just felt like it felt so it was so stigmatizing, or just, it took me back, mostly because I was like, if we continue to say the same thing about Hollywood films into the television landscape, it is literally going to end up looking the same way that it has. And that concerned me, because it's like, when you talk about opportunities, those are the types of content that should be put out internationally, right? And allow a chance to prove themselves. But by having the gatekeepers immediately just say no in terms of pitching and selling shows, because in their minds, it's not deemed international. It's like, who calls that, right? It's just, that's the way the numbers have been, but it's because it's what people have done. So anyways, I get off my soundbox because I'm like, sure.
No, preach. I mean, to me, that's the $1 million question, right? I mean, and how do we do that? How do we build that infrastructure, right? I mean, how do we get out of that kind of pattern? I mean, if anyone has thoughts on how to do that, I would appreciate. Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, Denise, I mean, this is something we probably have talked about several times, but that is, just to piggyback on that, and then I'm gonna answer your questions, I promise. That is, to be very clear, because this is the business of film panel, right? Conglomerates don't come anywhere unless there's money to be made, period, right? Like, the whole reason that there's a film business in Atlanta, Georgia right now is because there's a tax incentive there that makes people come there and spend money because they get a lot of it back. Same thing in New Orleans, same thing in any other state that's not LA or New York, right? The same principle applies when you talk about, these conglomerates coming to Africa, to the continent, it looks like a goodwill kind of thing, right? But that's not what that goodwill to get the lights on, right? So like Netflix coming over, that's about, hey, there's an audience here. We need to make sure we're serving that audience. But I think I think it's then on the creators and on the business folks to say, hey, if you're gonna come here, there has to be real equity involved, right? Like we got to make sure that you're building an industry here too, right? And to Denise's point, you do that to get the infrastructure, and then you wrap it in your own thing, right? Like you say, hey, we're gonna serve ourselves now. You know what I mean? That's really important, because otherwise we'll just always be on the hamster wheel and getting the pennies that fall. But the truth is, like, creating sustainability, which this whole conversation is about, is everything. So I think what that tangibly could look like, for example, what Selwyn's doing is genius, right? Even though he might just want to go have a party in Lagos, like, the truth is, when he goes there, that's jobs, right? I had a friend who, and just to take it down to like a very practical level, I got a friend from college, from grad school, who's originally from Ghana, went back to Ghana to shoot a short film, got there, and realized, like, in his specific village, he just needed to train people on how to do the jobs that he needed on his crew. Yeah. So he spent like a month or two teaching a group of people how to be gaffers and lighting technicians, teaching a couple people how to be a cinematographer, a couple people how to edit, etc. Right? That took a month or two. Then he shot the film, and the film is dope. It's great, but it's all of it. But he went there, and now whenever we go back to shoot a feature, or whenever he goes back to shoot anything, or anybody else, there's now a foundation of crew members. And my point is, if you take that as a microcosm and then kind of expand it into what we could do on a level where, Selwyn's bringing a film, or any of us, we could say to our studio, to our financiers, hey, as a part of me shooting in this place, you need to also help us create a foundation of crew. You need to help us create opportunity. We want to make sure that we're writing a show, to Dayo's point, if this is a show that's Niger and Texas, we got to make sure we have people from Nigeria, or at least Nigerian American, that are going to go pull people in like this. It's all about, again, building a bridge, but in a way that's going to create a community of people that can create long after that film has dropped down, got their money and ran. Right? Like that's been the trend a lot of times, honestly. That's just anything. People come where there's resources, they take all the resources, and then when that's gone, then they're out, right? So we want to make sure that we're not left without a real foundation, because people are going to come to make money, It's just a part of business, but let's make sure we're participating in real equity in that way.
That is so important. What Stephen just said, and also link back to what Denise was saying. I mean, the two of them are probably the ones who got their feet most firmly planted in production, right? Like making it shit happen. But it's so critical. So even from an earlier stage, and I think there's a talking point later about sort of what can local entrepreneurs or governments or or people can do where they are, and this idea of training and creating so people can function and serve as crew is so critical, right? So this show I'm doing at Hulu is an international show, and before COVID, I mean, the where we're going to shoot now is different, right? And I mean, now we're shooting in Canada, Mexico, and the US, right? But before COVID, we're looking at the world, right? Somewhere in the continent, in the Caribbean. And literally the second thing, I'm sitting with my line producer in the studio is like, is there a crew there, right? Can we find crew? And that sort of question that hinges the ability of money and jobs and opportunity to come to the country. If we can push that forward, it'll be fantastic. It's part of why the movie's happening in Lagos, because the studio was comfortable with a combination of who we bring and the people we can find there. We feel comfortable shooting an $80 million movie, part of it in Lagos. But that idea, no matter where you are, I think on the continent, and what you said, Stephen, was really, really, clever, right? In terms of, I bring a movie there, I bring a show there. Part of what I'm asking for on the US end is let's make sure that we leave something tangible here in terms of training people who are here in the local market. But in terms of looking to the future, can we create these hubs that serve the way those of us look at New Orleans right now, or Atlanta, or Vancouver, or sort of, we know we've got a local base there that's gonna, besides the rebate side, right, that's gonna help with the production of what we're doing. I think is invaluable.
That's
Stephen,
go ahead, Dayo.
No, I was just going to say, I think Stephen's points are great, and I think the point that Denise made earlier is just completely brilliant, and I think it's fantastic that Selwyn is speaking. Is putting his clout where his mouth is, and bringing this production to Nigeria. And on that point, and just Mehret, going back to what you were saying, is for us to understand, there's a couple of things about what the African TV and film landscape look like right now. For the English-speaking world, and I'll exclude Francophone Africa, because I don't know as much what's happening there, and a little bit of North Africa, because I do think that these are substantively culturally different markets from most of sub-Saharan Africa. Right now, we have two major players in terms of commissioning, financing, distribution content on the continent. And Net DSTV, who have been an 800-pound gorilla for the last, call it 30, 40 years. And then the new entrance, Netflix. And a lot of people are, don't want to say this, but I will. And the way that, it is not a healthy thing for the continent to have two major players deciding most of what happens with content. It's not about, I have friends at Netflix, I have friends at Mnet. This is not a criticism of the companies themselves for what they do, but it's for us to recognize, especially on the African continent, that it is completely unhealthy to have two companies that decide where 90% or more of the high-end production dollars go. It's also, I think, extremely problematic to have a situation where African productions end up being a very small, percentage of budgets that you see. I'm not even talking about Hollywood now. I'm talking about European productions. If you see a Swedish production, Sweden is what, 10, 12 million people. Portugal is 10, 12 million people. The types of budgets that nobody would consider, even for the smallest production, national production out of the smaller European countries. People feel completely comfortable coming to Africa and saying, well, this is so much more than you would get. And the net result of that, and this is the really dangerous thing, the net result of that is that you keep getting productions coming to the market that are the best that people can do with the budgets that they have, but are clearly a cut below what other international, international productions are bringing to these global platforms. And the net result of that is like, oh yeah, we're seeing some really cool stuff. I'm really happy to see, Black people and African people on the continent with their stories, but we're not taking into account the expectations are sort of lowered. That okay, this is kind of the best you can expect out of Africa. And it's people don't realize how much that is a function of the budgets that are available. And nobody's at all saying, hey, take, US budgets with, WGA minimums and SAG, and bring that, port it directly over, and that's the minimum that needs to be available for Africa. But there needs to be a lot more soul searching on the part of gatekeepers and decision makers on, fighting for the right things.
So I have no faith in gatekeepers, you know what I mean? And so like my train of thought, which, I've been working in Ethiopia for 6 years and have trained a bunch of crews. All the movies I do with the big players always have trainees. And one thing that I decided was we need badass producers actually on the ground who are African, who know how to negotiate these deals, because that is where things get screwed up. I just don't think we can have our fate decided by gatekeepers. We already know how that goes. You know what I'm saying? But what we really need to do, I think there is a real dearth of really good producers on the ground. It's a bottleneck in the industries here, actually, I would argue. And a lot of this has to do with, European co-production models that were tied to colonial powers, right? And so like European co-producers, I would say like at least 75%, 80% of this stuff goes through European co-production treaties that are not set up, right? In the favor of local markets, right? So the question you're raising, Dayo, is such a fundamental, and it brings us back to the business side. And I would love for everyone to kind of weigh in about how do you kind of hold a certain standard around the value of our stories when we're bringing it to market? Because obviously, young producers that are just trying to get in will very gladly take a bad deal. Like I felt like my first year here, all I was doing was trying to like get all the producers in a room and talk to them about this is the way you do it. And then I was like, okay, you can't do that. You burn out. So, obviously Dayo, we started Realness Institute in South Africa, really. And we started a producers program where Sundance is partnering and Yavi and all these people to try and train a cohort of people who can sit in those rooms, say, no, that's a bad deal, know enough, actually talk to each other. What did Netflix offer you? What are those numbers? Like that kind of soft power, right? Back to, Africa's soft power is really the thing that's going to shape our industry for the next 10 to 15 years, And I feel like there's a scramble for Africa that's happening right now because Anglophone and Francophone Africa have also crossed over, right? Like Canal Plus has entered my market. You know what I mean? And, what are those deals compared to others? Like, that's why I really feel like we need like thousands of Denises, thousands of Stevens, thousands, like people who actually know the business, who are also going to, be here to kind of talk back, if you will. But I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
So I'll just say this one thing, and this is the recovering entertainment lawyer in me. For the longest time, as a lot of us know, through the 90s and the early 2000s, a lot of what you heard for African American film was, oh, you can't do this because Black films don't travel. This doesn't happen. That does. There are all these limitations that are put on the market, in a subset of the American market at that, because of all these, again, what the gatekeeper says. So I'm 100% with you on not having faith in gatekeepers. And I guess for me, it's a subtle way of saying, for those of us who are at these organizations, it's not good enough for you to go in there and take a paycheck and do your job. You also need to be looking and representing for a whole continent. And to the point around, there's so many people who are looking for an opportunity to just do anything, right? That, the conversation, and I know Elias and I have broached this before, around does there need to be a union? do there need to be guilds that effectively say, look, if you're an international platform or production company, these are the minimums that you can operate with on the continent. You can't come in and throw, pennies at an opportunity, pennies at people to create stuff because there has to be some bottom line. There are no easy answers, but I'll just start off with that as, and say that, there also need to be a lot more savvy lawyers. And if you're a producer out there going and doing deals, make sure you get a lawyer. Make sure you get a lawyer who knows what they're doing. And I think sharing information around, this is an industry where people typically don't really talk about the budgets they're getting. And I mean, all of this stuff, a lot of times you hear numbers being bandied around about what's being done, particularly projects in the continent. People don't want to come out and say, well, actually, we got a small fraction of that, because you don't want yourself to look smaller. But the truth of it is, the budgets that are getting out on the continent are nowhere near where they need to be, and that needs to change.
Dayo, that is brilliant. I'm saying that all morning. I don't know enough about the continental market to understand why, but I cannot imagine this world that I live in functioning without unions and without guilds, right? Without a WGA, a SAG, a DGA, Producers Guild, like, we'd just be minnow for the sharks. So I guess from that context, I can understand the depravity that must be happening in terms of the continental market. I just want to say that. The answer to the question that you said, Mehret, I don't know the answer. I mean, I'd probably be much richer if I did. But I will say that there's some commonalities there that will be interesting, because I think the fight for, let's call it budget equity, is a common one, right? It's a matter of course, it's a matter of scale, you know what I mean, and differences, but it's a common one, right? The fight for what we do and what we make to be valued the same way as other people should, right? Like it's a common fight. I will say, only from my own immediate thing, and again, I don't know how these solutions transfer, but like I have a film at Legendary, producers, we're pushing for a certain budget, there's let's call it a $8 million gap, right, between what they'll give and what we think the film needs, right? Now, the challenge that you've got to navigate is, there are places that you can go to get those finishing funds, right? But it requires the studio or the financer giving up a piece of their position, so to speak. So that's the fight. It's like, and it's kind of crazy. It's like, no, I don't want to give you $10 million more, but you can't go take it from somebody else, because then that dilutes me. And it's like, fuck you want me to do then, So, but there are, what is Charles King's company, actually LeBron and those guys have been doing some of that as well. Spring Hill. The point being, there are entities here on our side of the business that help bring that equity a little bit closer to where it should be, but it's always an incredible fight. So again, I don't know to what degree this is helpful or illustrative for those of our brethren there on the continent, because there's some big pieces of the architecture that have to be there. Dayo's point about lawyers is key. I mean, we crap on lawyers like all the time, but I mean, without them, it's just, it's the antebellum era, right? Because corporations do what corporations do, which is exploit, and pay you as little as possible. So in terms of a future structure, I don't know what this timeline is, thinking about that superstructure that supports us as creatives, guilds, lawyers, that kind of structure, I think is just a really important marker to kind of put in the ground.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll add to everyone's point is that at the end of the day, this business creates jobs, right? It's an economy of itself. It's an industry of itself. And I think in a lot of ways, when I look at the international market, a lot of countries have doubled down on that, right? And I think one of the other issues, for lack of a better word, is a lot of naive people still look at Africa as like one country and not one continent, right? And they kind of put out all the countries in a homogenous pile in a lot of ways and speak very broadly about what they think, Africa should be doing, how they do it. And they forget just like how much it is, comprised of so many different countries, so many different cultures and different ways of doing things. And so you kind of really have to look at, to me, the local level when you're looking at how do you build infrastructure. And part of that to me is also the support of the local governments and saying, right, we are going to create and invest into this new industry that will create jobs for people, that will support pipeline training, infrastructure building, and be able to own our own. So these other corporations aren't coming in and basically demanding and paying XYZ and getting away with it because there is literally no one there to slap them on the hand, as you will. And I think often about, when I think about what Netflix's global takeovers look like, I actually think often about them trying to go into France. And what was very interesting about France, if you don't know, is that the French government said, okay, Netflix, you can be here, but we have some rules, right? And here are our rules. And a big part of it was, a certain percentage of the content that they wanted to create in the local language had to be local, had to be tied to hiring local crews. Like there was no exceptions. They didn't say, you're not going to just come over here and own and take over our country. How do we make sure that we're staying true to, what is being put out in the world and not give you up full ownership? And so I think in a lot of ways, it's like thinking of it in every which level, because yes, there need to be guilds. Yes, there should be more, I think, foundational elements that exist to help us do these productions at a budget and just protect us in general. And I hate to say it, but a small piece of that, again, from a local side is it's like, well, who is protecting the people and making sure that at the end of the day, this is thought about as an industry and a business that creates jobs, economies, and puts money in families' pockets at the end of the day, right? And we can talk about the creative business. We can talk about like how stories move us. But again, people's livelihoods are attached to this. And so, I just think there's another way to think about how do we support that? And hopefully that trickles up in a lot of ways where you're creating a full support staff for production infrastructure.
I took our tourism minister to Cannes to kind of show them this is a market, this is how many jobs we can create, et cetera, set up all these meetings with film commissioners, walked her through all the steps, did a fancy presentation. She came back to Ethiopia and called me into her office. She's like, Mehret, that was amazing. Not one person on my staff will understand any of this, and that's when I realized we have specialized knowledge. You know what I mean? We have really specialized technical knowledge. And this is why we have to build bridges, because I'm not saying it's every filmmaker's mission. It's certainly mine. I know this will be work that I will be doing for a long time on the continent because I go back and forth. But that's when I realized it's up to us, actually, some of us, not all of us, but some of us, to sit there. I talk to the tourism people. They try me sometimes, like it's really hard work, but I make sure to meet with them at least monthly. This is the latest. You want to come to our meeting? And it's those kind of informal mechanisms, actually, that we need to build in to kind of the way we do business, right? It can't just be that I see them, like the other pet peeve, you go to Sundance, you see all the African filmmakers as opposed to meeting actually on the continent. So like, how do we do that? How do we build with each other? How do we collaborate with each other? How do we have like production treaties between Ethiopia and South Africa or Ethiopia and Zambia? How do we do this horizontal work? Because all of you have such specialized knowledge that is so vastly needed, for example, here in terms of how we even begin to think about these things. How do we do that horizontal building?
Mehret, I'll just pick up on, I'll answer that question, but I'll pick up on the point that you made about sort of the specialized knowledge we have. And then the fact that, we do need, as people have said, we do need the governments involved. There's no question about that. Right. But that's a necessary but insufficient step. And what you find out is, over the last 20 years in Nigeria, there have been probably 4 administrations. So you've had that conversation and, people go, they leave government. You have this conversation, you go to a certain point, and then the person changes. I've seen the same thing in Nigeria. I've seen it in Senegal. I've seen it in Kenya, Uganda, South Africa. It keeps happening. And what we haven't spoken of yet, but we need to, is the role of capital from Africa. And what a lot of people don't know is that there is money in Africa. There's got to be, like, if you just look over the last, I moved from New York to Lagos in 2002. to start working with Nollywood. And if I think about the resources that are available, even just within Nigeria, for the film sector, then comparing what is available now to what was available then, it's night and day. It doesn't feel like it because some key structures are not in place. But back then it was a joke. It was like you're working with Nollywood. It was like a punchline. People would just collapse in laughter, right? Now a lot of the corporate sector folks and the government and organizations like the Bank of Industry, which is a federally owned institution in Nigeria, are putting funds towards film. But the private sector is largely absent. In South Africa, there's probably a good, $300 to $500 million that is dedicated to the film sector. The private sector, other than excluding production studios and the broadcasters, private money is almost non-existent. Right. And we need to start really critically answering this question. The African Export-Import Bank has a $500 million film fund, film and creative sector fund. The BOI has money. The IDC in South Africa has money. Senegal has a film fund. There are all these, if you take those pools of money, there's at least $1 billion worth of, probably $1.5 billion worth, and I'm not including the North African countries. I know Egypt has some stuff as well. There's $1.5 billion worth of, call it government-related money dedicated to the sector. I don't know that there's outside the broadcasters and people in the film and TV value chain, I don't know that $300 million comes into that industry. And until that money comes, private sector investor money comes to match the government money, we're going to struggle because the government doesn't know where the action is. If you have a private equity firm put in $100 million and make 3x from that, they are in that business for life.
Yeah.
The governments come and change. People decide this is important or this is not important. If a private sector company is making money from this, they will consistently say, hey, Selwyn comes in, does a project here, we invest in it, we make money. Deniese has a project in LA that has some component here, or brings someone from here, takes a story from here that we invested in and produces it, we make money. They will drive that, right? And I think we need to think creatively around how we connect the dots. And I think this is obviously one of the key steps, is just getting people in the room, having the conversation, and continuing to push on, to push the envelope.
How do you incentivize that, Dayo, or anyone else? Like the business side of our business, right? When I think about distribution and I think about financing and film funds and all of that, how do you begin to make a case for that? Because in Africa, we have other issues that governments are going to constantly prioritize, and I'm a firm believer that actually arts and culture obviously is important. It has all kinds of benefits, not least of which is economic growth. But how do you begin to make a case for kind of financing that is local? How do you begin to do that?
I think, ironically, I think it's the same thought, and unfortunately, I think it's the same process that would change to our point earlier about soul seeking for gatekeepers, which may not happen, right? What makes gatekeepers move is money. The same thing applies, I think, locally. So I think if you can make the business case for it, I think that's how infrastructure is invested into. I think that's how conversation starts to happen. I think that's how, like, real focus, to your point, I'm sure if there was proof of concept financially already when you took the Minister of Tourism to Cannes, was really smart, by the way. I hadn't thought about how you could get somebody excited. Cannes is the way to do it for sure. But if there was a proof of concept already for how this also pours money back into the economy, pours money into people's pockets, et cetera, I think that is the way to get people excited about it. Now, granted, we would hope that people would just say arts and culture is important, these stories need to be told, we need to help, et cetera. But the truth is, I think it's that plus the financial proof of concept too.
So I want to steer this conversation a bit towards also people who are interested in entering the professions. Because I know that's a lot of the audience. They're looking at you saying, I want to be you. And if you had to build that bridge backwards, what advice do you have for people who want to enter, whether it's writers, producers, directors, showrunners, filmmakers? What would you say about advice entering into this career as a professional pathway?
Oh my God, that's a
Loaded question.
That's a 1 week panel right there. Wow. I'm sure we all have a ton. Anybody want to go first?
Well, I'll say something that I normally say, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, which is, this idea of networking across, right? And I say that most importantly, because of my background. Like, I didn't come up traditionally through Hollywood. I didn't work my way up as an assistant. I didn't spend time on people's desks. I didn't go work at an agency. I just put myself out there. I did go to film school, but coming out of school, I decided I was just going to be a freelance producer because I was like, you know what? I know how to produce. I learned some things. I'd rather go get real world experiences. And, in my 20s, I could definitely afford to be broke for a while. But at the end of the day, I bet on myself and this collective of filmmakers and artists that I was connecting and meeting with in LA. And it inspired me because they were just as hungry as I was. And I mean, it's how I met someone like Issa back in the day. It really was at that time, this movement, and I'm speaking like 10 years ago, but it was exciting with the rise of digital coming out of the 2010s and seeing that there's a new content, there's a new platform, right? That there are no gatekeepers for it. Like, it's really tech companies at the end of the day, but we can go and record a video right now and put it on Instagram, and it has the ability or the chance to reach a global audience, right? And so what you're seeing is, I think, this exciting time where now, if nothing else, video platforms have only exponentially grown. Now there's video platforms on Twitter and TikTok and Snapchat, like you name it, right? Tons and tons of apps and social media and ways to connect us, and publishing platforms too. We can't forget about those. So how does that all relate to how do we get jobs? Well, to be honest, I think one of the best ways to learn about this business is just to go and do it. I think even when you get to a certain level and you're ready for someone to give you that chance, chances are they're not going to give you that chance without having some skin in the game, even if you had to do it yourself, right? So it's coming prepared and doing the work, and honestly realizing that you don't need to wait for someone to tell you you can do this, right? You only discover it by doing it. And one of the most empowering things is to link arms with, I think, your peers and people who share that same passion, who want to tell the same stories you do. And yes, budget is always a concern. Yes, there's never enough money. As a producer, I'll tell you right now, you'll never have enough money. I don't care, even if you get to the $1 million levels, you're still, to someone's point, begging for those extra millions, right? So when you think about, well, what do I have? You have resources, right? You can be creative, and there are no rules. And so I think, given all the red tape and all of the industry stuff, the best way to be seen is to do something to be seen, or to watch and to showcase your work, and really lean on the power of this new world order that we all keep speaking of, which is, hopefully through the rise of the internet and all these other screens, that there are several ways to find your own, and the way that we used to do things back in the day is inevitably changing, and I think for the better. So that would be my advice. Go make some stuff, go find your comrades, and go build that support team on a local level, and don't wait for anybody.
I love it.
That's great, Denise. I would so I'm being additive, not just repetitious, because I think literally all Denise said is fantastic. But just in the realm of here and kind of here, right? Heart and mind. Like, I've been a writer just about my entire life. So I'll speak about writing, not necessarily directing, producing, so on and so forth. I think at the core of it is a couple of things. Trust and believe that you yourself are enough, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean, there's a point in your writing arc where you're like, well, what is the thing that I need to write that the market wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is the thing that I have to create that people want to see, and that is a trap that I would strenuously advise you to stay out of, right? Especially now, especially where we are now in the business. There's a phrase that I've been using literally on every pitch that I go into, and that phrase is the universal is found in the specific, right? The universal in terms of relatability and all the stuff you're chasing for is found in the specific. It's found in you, right? So like I'm writing a story that has like romance at the core of it. Like I'm not going to find universal in some sort of like generic general, can I make this into into Titanic or whatever. I'm going to find universal through who you are as a writer and your specific emotion and your specific cultural, family, national, all the things that make you you. When I read a script, that's what I want to see in it. That's what I want to feel in it, you know? And I love what Denise said about life, right? Because so I have a very specific bias. Like I don't really hire film school writers because they write the goddamn same. So like
Save the cat.
I'm like, you went to UCLA, USC. Okay, great. I don't really care. You know, like I like the person who has lived, right? Who has scars and trauma and pain and cuts and bruises and fell down and got up. And like your task as a storyteller, as a writer, is how do I take all of that stuff that makes me me and get it on the page? That's what you got to learn, you know how to do. And the last thing that I would say is and this predates where we are in terms of the conversation we had about Zoom and new access, but I think it goes hand in hand with it. We're just in a different space on the technological side in terms of opportunities for writers to, to gain entry and to break in, right? When I broke in, it was like pre things like the Blacklist that's run by a good buddy of, I'm sure, a lot of ours, Frank and Leonard. There are ways that technology serves to lower the sort of barrier of entry, because there's kind of two things that you've got to do as a writer. You got to get really 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 good at your craft, and then you've got to get that thing in front of people, right? The first part you can handle, and you can handle it in context with your peers. Like that point Denise made about like surround yourself with people who are on the same path and have the same drive is extraordinarily valuable, because this shit is so hard. You cannot do it by yourself. You know what I mean? Even if it's just that spiritual, like I'm exhausted today, I'm giving up on the dream, someone else who is walking beside you, like you really truly need that. I have a good buddy, I don't know if he's on here, but my best friend, Carlito Rodriguez, who like me was a hip hop journalist, editor at the Source, like, all that kind of stuff. Like we literally did this at the same time. I was a featured guy back then. He was TV guy. We're like, we're gonna go to Hollywood and break in together, kind of do this whole thing. And crazily enough, we managed to do that. He's a very successful television writer. And I'm not doing too bad either. But you need that support system. So I think, without hogging the mic anymore, those are those are my main points.
Even any wise words?
No, I think both of those points are great. I know, if you don't have the resources to go shoot a thing, right? Selwyn's point, writing is the cheapest stage of production. So it's the thing that you can do whether you have a computer or not. You know what I mean? Like you can tell a story. And even in obviously the mechanics of screenwriting, et cetera, that's the thing. You may have to get a book to learn that, or may need the program to do that kind of thing. But resources, I know resources vary depending on where you are, right? And so if you don't have the ability to go physically shoot a thing yet, then write the thing. I think that's very keen advice.
I'm very curious to know, how critical you think formal education and professional training actually is, especially based on what you just said, Selwyn, because I did not grow up in film. It was a second career for me. But, film training programs, there's really, they're limited actually in some places, in some countries. And so like, how critical do you see that being in order for it to grow? What would you say?
Steve was going to have an answer, I think, obviously, not to speak for either Steve or Denise, that's shaded by where they sit production wise, right? And it's a whole other thing, right? I'm not even going to start talking about, that realm of the business. But for what I do, for me, I firmly believe you can do it yourself, you don't have to, I mean, I say this to kids, people I talk to here all the time, like who look like us, in industries across the country. You don't have to go to UCLA and NYU and USC, like there are fantastic, like I have a whole email that I'm like, here's this email of like how to be a writer. I'm like, bam, buy Pam Douglas's book on writing TV, buy Sid Feld's book on screenwriting, go to the website, go into the story.com by Scott Myers. There's every interview with every writer ever, on there. There's a mantra that Scott says that I've copied. It's write pages, read scripts, and watch movies or TV, right? Read, write, and watch, right? On repeat, right? And the corollary to that now is then finding yourself in a peer group, right? That's sort of like on the same path, so you have someone to sort of bounce your work off of. But this great old worldwide internet that we have, the information is there. It can be found. I know there's I'm speaking to the English-based part of the continent right now, not barring for language, but for those of you who want to be in this game, like, there's no reason why you shouldn't have read every classic that there is. There's no reason why you shouldn't have, at this point, if you want to do this, read the 100 greatest, scripts that AFI has. There's no reason why you should not have read, Vince Gilligan's Breaking Bad pilot or David Simon's The Wire pilot. Like, the best of what we do is available for you for free. And that is the first step towards education.
Yeah, I agree with Selwyn. Do it yourself. I mean, I grew up on a farm selling peaches. You know what I mean? So like, there was no film industry there. And now selling movies is not that different, actually. And I think honestly, I think the truth is, I did go to college, went to Morehouse College in Atlanta, and then I went to USC, but I didn't learn how to do what I'm doing there. I learned what I'm doing growing up on the farm with my granddad, hearing him, how he tells stories. They always had a beginning, middle, and end. They always had a really strong character. He always gave it a sort of a like personal connection to it before he launched into a story. Like, I learned pitching from him. Unintentionally, he wasn't teaching me. And that's an informal education. While he's probably working me on the farm, he's telling me these stories to keep me entertained. But the point being that I think ultimately, for me, school was about, grad school, at least USC and Morehouse, I guess, but really USC was about connecting with other people that were in that space, right? That you knew were gonna go do it. The first 3 movies that I made came from my friends, that were in grad school with us. One of the movies I'm making right now is from somebody I was in Morehouse with, right? So that is what I got from school, but I wouldn't say I learned. I could have met those people just being in it, you know what I mean, and doing the work and being out there, to Selwyn's point, and finding other people who are really serious about it. Because ultimately, not everybody in grad school for film, even though it was expensive, not everybody there was serious about the craft either. So ultimately, the people that you want to connect with are the people who around you, are the people, to Denise's point earlier about networking horizontally, making sure that you're finding people who are serious about what they do, right? In my friend group, I think there's writers, there's directors, there was actors. I was probably the only one that was like crazy enough to only want to do producing, and I love it because it's half business and half creative. But they were all very serious about their craft as I was about mine. I think that's ultimately who you want to find.
Denise, do you want to weigh in on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of both mindsets, to be honest. So I also, I call myself a film school brat. So, but I use school, to Stephen's point, very strategically, right? I went to Brooklyn College in New York, and I used it to get out of Vegas. And I had actually was exposed to video production in high school. So my career started really early on, and it was like, oh, I love this, I'm creating, but what the hell is it? I have no context. I didn't know anyone. And so for me, college was like, I'm going to college no matter what, but I didn't realize true honesty. Like, I did not know my senior year in high school, when I looked into colleges, that I could even go get a degree in film. I just remember feeling like, I don't know anyone who has a degree in film. What the hell do you do with that? But you know what? I'm going to go to college, and I can use this as a way to learn more and just say, give me the foundation, give me the education component to, like, what is film? What are these classics, right? And that's what Mike's been in undergrad. And I discovered my love for producing similarly in undergrad. And when it was time to graduate, I remember being 22 and feeling like I wanted to be a producer, I know I have to get to LA. I come from a single mother household. I don't have the resources at my disposal to just be like, great, I'm moving there, I'm gonna get an apartment. I was like, but I also don't want to sleep on couches and just have to go find a job. So I didn't mind signing up for 2 more years of grad school because I was like, well, I love school. And if I can get into a grad school in Los Angeles, then there's my way to move there. I'm protected in what I call this film school bubble for 2 years where I don't have to get a job. I can just focus on the craft. And the great thing about grad school for producing was all I did was produce. And so it wasn't just like this general education anymore. It really was, I think, especially when people say, do you need to go to grad school? I'm always like, well, do you need to sharpen your skills in any level? Because you only go to grad school, in my opinion, when you really know what it is you want to do and when you want a little bit more of a formal training to guide you and help kind of cover the things that you feel like you have yet to experience or learn about because of several ways of doing it yourself, right? So again, as much as I'm like, do it yourself, find your tribe, I'm like, yes, I went to school, but I went to it for very, very specific reasons. And I mean, if this tells you anything, I came out of AFI I went to AFI in Los Angeles for grad school and got my master's in producing, but I came out of there while digital was evolving, and I was 24 years old and saying, you know what, I could produce anything. And I started applying to those freelance jobs, and the first thing I applied to and got an interview for was to produce Awkward Black Girl for Issa Rae. And so in a lot of ways, I always my testimony is always like, well, if I hadn't spent those 6 years fully focusing on, taking every advantage, every single advantage, I mean, 12 internships plus, like every advantage that school offered me, and not just said, I'm going to go get a film degree. I made sure that I was going to apply that in some capacity. So that's my counter argument for film schools.
Yeah.
I'll tell you it's not for everybody, and everyone has a different path. And so that's my story. Stephen has his story. And I think in a lot of ways, as young people of color in this industry, it's what we use to skip ahead in a lot of ways and not spend 10 years. But I think if you're going to do it and you're going to sign up for that debt and you're going to put yourself in that situation, it better be around a plan, because what the last thing you want to do is be a couple $100,000 in debt and graduate and be like, well, now what, right? Like, take advantage of of everything that comes to you when you are a student. I mean, discounts to festivals, you name it, like take advantage. So that's
just add one thing. Add one thing to what Denise said. One, just amen, because honestly, like grad school for it sounded like kind of for both of us was also like school itself. The academia part of it kind of became a hobby in the sense that we use school to get into other places, like every semester interning somewhere, studios, networks, production companies, trying to understand how the game works, really getting all the knowledge. And then when we left, like we both around the same time, I think actually when we left school, just jumped into producing, because it wasn't that we knew everything, but we had gotten enough contacts to say, okay, I'm a producer now. And then nobody believes you until you make something, but at least you're saying it out loud, and then you go make a thing, and now you can say, hey, I'm actually a producer. And it does send you on a different track. It's a road that is not paved, right? It's a dirt road. You got to kind of figure that thing out and find your way through the woods and hopefully get to civilization. But ultimately, you're gonna find your way, as long as you, to Selwyn's point earlier about the heart and mind, as long as you know that it's your calling. I think that's really important too, to make sure that this is your vocation, not your occupation. Otherwise, you'll end up kind of in the wilderness.
It's so true. I often know so many people who are like, oh, I think I want to go be a director, so I'm gonna go to film school. And I'm like, no, just go direct something. Decide if you love it, and then go take on that responsibilities. Because, the stakes are too high to waste that amount of time.
You guys are dropping some serious gems. I hope people appreciate. I think the other question I have for you is, any advice on pitching? This is a question that was coming up. And if you had one piece of advice when you got that meeting, you wrote your story, you're in front of that decision maker, what piece of advice do you have for young producers or writers who are pitching?
Wow. Well, I make my living pitching. It is a whole, and it's weird. I would say it's kind of unfair, because I think that the characteristics that make one a really great writer are not necessarily the same things that make you a really great pitcher, right? And I'm like, why do we have to know how to do both of these things? But you sort of do. I would say, look, think think about these questions, and there's a ton more, right? But just think about these at the core of your pitch, not the performative part, but the sort of content part of it. And people who, these guys who are here are going to laugh because we hear these questions like all the time in any pitch, right? But why does the story matter? Why does it matter now, right? Why are you the only person in the world who can tell it, right? And how is that story articulated through the journey of a character or characters that are unique, complex, and driven, right? There's tons of other stuff, but if you nail those, you're not doing too badly.
That's gold. That's gold. I wish I'd written that down. It's recorded, right?
It's recorded. Don't worry. It's recorded.
Yeah, I think what Selwyn just said is absolutely the content of what a pitch should be. If you want to create sort of a structure for it, what I literally use the model that I got from my granddad. You know what I mean? What I mentioned earlier. I've kind of since synthesized it into into 3 steps, 3 C's: catalyst, connection, and the creation, which is just like why, how, and what, right? Which is like a Simon Sinek kind of philosophy on marketing, etc. Like, what's the why of the thing? How does it work? And then what are you selling? But the catalyst being like, what's your actual, where is this coming from? Like, why, to his point, why are you telling this story? Where did it sort of originate? I think always giving some sort of personal thought or personal anecdote is always helpful to lead people into why you are the expert to tell the story. The connection being obviously literally how you connect that personal to what it is you're about to sell. By the time, if you do those 2 steps beautifully, by the time you actually tell somebody what the creation is, it doesn't matter what you're selling. They're buying it, even if the socks are the dirty laundromat. Like they're gonna buy those. They're gonna buy those socks. The laundromat's gonna buy those socks. But the creation is, and obviously you want to make sure you articulate what the story is. But that's kind of the 3 steps: catalyst, connection, and creation.
That's dope.
I want to use this to kind of turn back to the market, thinking again about the African continent and the narratives that are usually told about this place. So how do we start to push back, I guess, against narratives that people are comfortable kind of financing, putting money around? How do you make a case for doing something different, so to speak? What are your thoughts on that, Dayo?
I think that, it speaks to what we were talking about earlier about, if you don't have capital coming from the continent backing projects, then you're going to get a certain type of film made, you're going to get a certain type of TV show made, and that's just the natural flow of things. I was listening to the points made, and I didn't want to interrupt because I think that, it's, and I hope people in the audience are getting it. It's like an immense privilege to get access to, writers and producers at the top of the game in Hollywood, and to hear how they go about their craft and how they go about their business. I know it is a little bit frustrating to people if you're sitting in Kenya or Uganda or Zambia, hearing some of these things, because you might as well be talking about Mars. That's not your reality. But I do think that within those, the advice in the 3 C's and, the advice you're getting is still very, very useful, because if you're writing or creating, those are universal things. However, I think to the point of how, where does the rubber meet the road in terms of opportunities that are available to people, for instance, who are physically located in Africa, who are producing stuff, creating in Africa. I think some of this also has to be finding ways to pull in private investors, getting people to see what you're doing and getting people to back what you're doing. About 9 years ago, there's and Nigeria is a place that is quote unquote known for Nollywood, and they don't follow the rules, and we have our own rules, and we do things certain ways. And what was going to be a very big step 8, 9 years ago was a certain production, which was an adaptation of a book that was going to be, it was the largest film production done in Nigeria at the time. And it was largely backed by private sector investment. Unfortunately, the project didn't do well. And what that meant was, for another 8, 10 years, a lot of the people who were burnt on that project are very skeptical about putting money at that level into new projects. But nobody's going to solve the problem of Zimbabwe or of Cote d'Ivoire from Los Angeles or New York. And I'm speaking as somebody who has spent time in both of those places. There are things that you can learn, there are connections to make, but the problem, the challenge and obstacles have to be overcome within the countries. To me, it's private sector investors. Get them in. If it's an uncle, if it's a classmate. Actually, great example here. The Milkmaid, which was Nigeria's entry into the first successful Nigerian entry for the best international feature film, was made by Desmond Obiageli. It was largely financed by a US-based producer, a US-based surgeon who put up most of the $1 million that it took to shoot that film. Why? Because the two of them went to high school together in Nigeria. And, Desmond came and said, you know me, this is what I want to do. This is how it's different from everything else. And they made history. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. And I've read some of had a chance to go through the chat, and I get a sense of frustration, people coming through. But you need to look, if you're telling a story in Zambia, you need to find out who in Zambia is willing to back that story. If you're telling a story in Uganda, you need to find out who in Uganda is willing to back that story, and find collaborations by all means. But within each of our countries, the change in technology, 20 years ago would have been a completely different story. Now, and I don't want to overflog the whole digital production thing, but in a very real sense, from the camera phones to the Canons, the accessibility that this industry provides to you as a filmmaker, as a creative, is incomparable. It's sort of where we were in the 90s with hip hop, in terms of just producing stuff and making things happen, regardless of, what the industry thought about, how music is made. It's really using our own tools. And I just, have to say that to those people who are out there a little frustrated that we're sort of speaking at a certain level, it's to say to you, keep pushing, but also as you're looking to make this global connect and get this global advice, look within your countries for people who are doing things. And there are always people doing things who you can collaborate with.
Conscious of time, I could talk to you all forever, but we're actually at the end, and I know that Denise, you have to go. So if you have any closing thoughts you want to share, I wanted to actually give you the chance first.
Yeah, look, we talked about a lot, so I'm like, how do I wrap all of these subject matters up? But I'll just give the highlights again of where I am coming from on this subject matter, which is, create, find your tribe, believe that we can build our own. Do not let that slip your minds at all. Don't let them don't give these corporations all the power. But also really, really think from a global standpoint, again, how can all marginalized communities and voices really come together and build our own, again, at a local level, at a global level, and a lot of it from a global perspective starts at the local level. So, I thank you guys for having me, and I'm just so inspired by this conversation and to connect with so many like-minded folks and see new friends and familiar friends. So thank you guys. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Dope.
Yeah. Before folks leave, Mehret, if I can just say this, on a very practical thing, there are a lot of questions that have been asked, and there's some really amazing things that have been shared by the panelists. Selwyn, I know you talked about your email. Can we commit to sharing and making available on a page on Africa Self Power some of the resources and ideas that folks have shared during the course of this, so that the people have made reference to Sid Fields and some of those resources, as Selwyn said, and as other people have said, are available. Can we share that and then pass that on to Nkiru and Obi at ESP and make that available so that people can actually see, look, here are the resources. If you didn't know what Selwyn was referring to, here are the things where you can go and, here's the things Stephen was talking about, here are the things Deniese was talking about. Can we do that?
I am sure we can do that. We can do that. I will take that as an action item and work with Nkiru to make that happen. But I want to also just any closing thoughts from you, Selwyn, and then Stephen as well.
For sure. And I'm sorry, guys, I do have a 10:30 studio call I have to jump to. I would just say, as I think I began with, the thing that's important to me in my life is I'm an immigrant, right? I am a Black man from a other part of the world who came to this country with my family to find my way. And I think that philosophy is what's guided me personally and in my career. It's very much about work and build local but think global, right? So it's that sort of balance, but between the two. And I think that's just a perspective that can be informative to all of us, no matter where we are. I'm going to say again, because I think he blushes when I say it, how amazing it was for me 15 years ago to connect with Obi and and his crew, and really thinking about those kinds of things, writ small, writ medium, writ large. There was a thing that we did in the hip hop business in the 90s. We used to love these sort of mini festivals, if you call it, Jack the Rapper, How Can I Be Down, so on and so forth. But what they did was just foster community and conversation. And I think how we do those things in this brand new world, if we hold on to that as the goal, whether it's digital, whether it's in person, however we do it, this notion of fostering community and conversation, I think is going to be the bedrock that helps us all move forward. I'm sure these guys will have some stuff up. I can't read and look at everyone's stuff, so I won't even promise that. All right. But look, I do have a big new overall deal that I've got to feed, and I have to make stuff, right? So I am in the business of, do you have something really great, right? It's got to go through some gatekeepers. Yes, I'm not going to pretend that doesn't exist, but I am someone who, things can be sent to, and I'll figure out how to disseminate that in the right way through Obi and you guys, so that what to send and who to send it to and how to go about that. All right.
Thank you, Selwyn. Stephen,
welcome.
you want to bring us home?
And Steve,
Sure.
and you guys, please hit me up. Sorry, I got to bounce, but they'll definitely give me a shout. All you guys, just give me a shout. Let's keep our own little group together.
We'll stay
All
connected.
right.
Don't worry.
Yes.
I'm
Take
hard
care,
to
guys.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I mean, mine might not be as wise, but it's really simple. It's just that it's all possible. I think that the truth is, anything that is for you is going to be for you, right? And I think that might sound kind of in the clouds, but I really believe that. I also think that the other thing to remember is that you got the juice. Like, again, these corporations wouldn't be coming to filmmakers or coming to the continent or coming to hear our stories and all those things if it was not worthwhile, right? And frankly, if it wasn't profitable. So just remember that, like, you got the juice.
Yeah. I didn't mean to cut you out. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I think, the points everybody has made are great, and Stephen's point is fantastic. And one great thing about this industry, whether you're in film or TV, is that every single thing that has been significant in film or television started out in somebody's head, bar none. I don't know if there's any other industry that's like that. Every single thing started with somebody saying, I have an idea, I have a story. And I think that what Stephen has said, and Deniese and the success that these folks have had should be that continuing inspiration for us wherever we're listening from. That if you have a story to tell on film, on television, if you really want to tell that story, you can and you will, because whether it's a film that did $1 billion in the box office or had a $200 million budget, it all started with somebody or a handful of people sitting around and saying, "Hey, I have an idea."
All right, thank you to the Africa Soft Power Project. I'm completely inspired, and I will take the action items to Nikiro and figure out how to push this all forward. So, and thank you for our audience.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Nkiri, turn off your mic.
I just saw that I was muted. Thanks, guys. This has been incredible. Obi and I were chatting, and it's like, this has been a masterclass. I say this, but I actually really mean it when I say it now. This has been the best ever. Like, no, this has been really phenomenal. Thank you guys for being here. This is, I mean, I feel like the whole, like from the beginning to the end is like, you know, like weapons of like, you know, like mass destruction in terms of how we can take over. So this is incredible. Mehret, you did an incredible job. Stephen, thank you for being here. Dayo, your family. Obi, close it.
Yeah, but listen, I mean, Mehret, what an incredible moderation. I mean, thank you so much for that. Guys who are still left on the panel, Dayo and Stephen, I mean, just bringing so much knowledge to the table. The lady, I mean, Deniese was like president of the panel, you know, I think coming with the hardcore information that we need about retaining our rights and building our own platforms. But yeah, it was just an incredible panel. And I think it's the same energy and the same conversations that Dayo and I have been having for 15, 20 years. And, you know, exactly what Selwyn was talking about when he came here with Corey Smith, Telly Kweli's manager, and they were trying to do the Fell Out project in 2007, which, by the way, still hasn't been made. So, I mean, we know we have a million untold stories on the continent, and I'm just hoping that all of this stuff will help us bring people closer together to make more important projects. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you again for having us.
Thank you and good night. Thank you so much for being here.
You.
Thanks. And you can catch me on. Thank you so much. Thanks, Daya. Thanks, Stephen.